Ladies and gentlemen, some of you are losing yourselves trying to be loved by people who were never willing to value you. You keep begging for attention, overthinking every message, sacrificing your peace just to keep someone from leaving, while secretly feeling emptier every single day. But what if the problem was never your worth? What if the moment you stop chasing love is the moment you become unforgettable? Stay with me, because what you are about to hear could completely change the way you see yourself and every relationship in your life. Ladies and gentlemen, and some of you are emotionally exhausted and nobody even knows it, and you smile in front of people, but cry when you are alone at night. And you stare at your phone hoping their name will appear, replaying old conversations in your mind, wondering what changed. Wondering why the person who once made you feel special suddenly treats you like you mean nothing. And you reply fast because you are scared to lose them. But they leave your messages unread for hours like your feelings do not matter. And you give chances after chances. Forgive disrespect. Ignore red flags. Just because you are afraid of being abandoned again. And then slowly, without realizing it, you start losing yourself trying to keep somebody who was never fighting to keep you. And you overthink every little thing, every dry text, every late reply, every change in energy, blaming yourself for problems you did not create. And some of you have loved people so deeply that you forgot how to love yourselves, and you made them your peace, your happiness, your entire world, while they only saw you as an option whenever they felt lonely. And then the painful truth is, the more you beg for love, the more invisible you start to feel. But tonight, something is about to change inside you. And because you are about to understand why chasing people destroys your confidence, why desperation pushes love away, and why the moment you finally recognize your worth, you become impossible to ignore. And there is a reason some people walk into a room and shift the atmosphere without saying a single word. It is not because they are louder. It is not because they are more beautiful than everybody else. It is not because they have learned how to manipulate hearts or control minds. It is because there is something alive inside them that speaks before their mouth ever opens. There is confidence in their spirit. There is peace in their posture. There is purpose in their presence. And when somebody carries that kind of energy, people are naturally drawn to it. And too many people spend their lives trying to force affection from somebody who cannot see their value. They chase attention. They beg for validation. They shrink themselves just to fit inside somebody else's comfort zone. But you were not created to perform for love. You were not born to audition for acceptance. Real connection does not come from desperation. It comes from alignment. It comes from becoming so rooted in who you are that nobody's confusion can make you question your worth. And listen carefully. The greatest mistake you can make is believing that love is something you have to wrestle out of another human being. You cannot pressure somebody into seeing your beauty. You cannot manipulate somebody into respecting your spirit. You cannot exhaust yourself trying to convince a person to choose you while they are comfortable overlooking you. The more you chase somebody who is emotionally unavailable, the more you abandon yourself in the process. But when you begin to honor your own value, something changes. Your walk changes, your voice changes, your standards change. Your energy begins to carry weight because people can feel when someone finally understands who they are. There's power in a person who no longer needs approval to feel complete. And you want to know what truly captures attention? Authenticity, confidence, emotional maturity, kindness without weakness, strength without arrogance. A person who can stand in a room full of rejection and still know they are worthy of love. That kind of confidence cannot be faked. It is built in private moments when you decide to heal instead of breaking apart. And some people are trying to attract love while still carrying the wounds of every person who hurt them. You cannot build healthy connection on top of unresolved pain. If somebody left you feeling unworthy, that pain must be confronted. If somebody betrayed your trust, that hurt must be healed. Because when wounds stay untreated, they begin to control your decisions. They make you cling to people who are wrong for you. They make you confuse attention with affection. They make you settle for crumbs because you are starving emotionally. But you are not called to survive on crumbs. You are worthy of a table prepared with respect, honesty, consistency, and care. Stop romanticizing struggle. Stop believing that confusion is chemistry. Stop believing that emotional chaos is passion. Healthy love does not constantly leave you anxious. Healthy love does not make you beg for communication. Healthy love does not disappear every time things become difficult. And there is something magnetic about a person who has learned emotional discipline. A person who does not panic when someone pulls away. A person who does not collapse because a text message was ignored. A person who understands that their value is not tied to another person's temporary attention. That kind of emotional strength is rare, and rare things naturally attract attention. And many people believe attraction begins with appearance, but appearance alone cannot hold somebody's attention for long. Beauty may open a door, but character determines whether somebody stays in the room. Energy matters. Integrity matters. The way you treat yourself matters. People notice when somebody respects themselves enough to establish boundaries. People notice when somebody refuses to tolerate dishonesty. People notice when somebody knows how to walk away from situations that diminish their peace. And let me tell you something powerful. The moment you stop chasing people who are not choosing you, you create space for the right people to find you. Some doors remain closed because your hands are still gripping what no longer belongs in your life. Sometimes the breakthrough begins when you release what you were never meant to carry. And there are people exhausting themselves trying to become irresistible to somebody who cannot even recognize genuine love. But not everybody has the emotional capacity to appreciate what you bring into their life. Some people are immature. Some people are distracted. Some people are broken in ways they refuse to confront. And if you are not careful, you will spend years trying to heal somebody who is committed to staying wounded. And you cannot save people by sacrificing yourself. And you cannot force readiness into somebody who enjoys inconsistency. And you cannot make somebody value loyalty when they are addicted to temporary excitement. And what you can do is become the healthiest, strongest, most grounded version of yourself. You can become somebody who radiates peace instead of insecurity. You can become somebody who attracts through authenticity instead of manipulation. And there is a difference between attraction and control. Attraction is natural. Control is forceful. Attraction flows from confidence, joy, purpose, and emotional presence. Control flows from fear. Fear says, how do I make them want me? Confidence says, the right person will recognize my value. Fear says, what if I lose them? Confidence says, I will never lose what is truly aligned with my life. Fear begs, confidence attracts. And then many people have never learned the power of silence. Not every situation requires you to chase closure. Not every unanswered message requires another paragraph. Not every rejection requires an emotional collapse. Sometimes silence is dignity. Sometimes silence is strength. Sometimes walking away is the loudest statement you can make, and you have to learn how to carry yourself with emotional composure. That does not mean pretending you never hurt. It means refusing to let your emotions control your self-worth. It means feeling disappointment without allowing it to define your identity. It means grieving what could have been without losing sight of what still can be. And people are drawn toward those who have vision for their lives. Purpose is attractive. Ambition is attractive. Passion is attractive. There is something compelling about a person who is building something meaningful. A person who is not sitting around waiting for romance to become their entire identity. A person who has dreams, discipline, goals, and direction. And too many people become consumed with trying to be chosen instead of focusing on becoming whole. But wholeness changes everything. When you become emotionally healthy, your standards rise naturally. You stop entertaining confusion. You stop accepting disrespect disguised as affection. You stop chasing inconsistent people because your spirit becomes addicted to peace instead of chaos. And there are relationships that look exciting from the outside, but are draining the life out of the people inside them. Constant arguing, constant insecurity, constant emotional games, constant uncertainty. That is not love growing. That is emotional exhaustion disguised as romance. And love should not constantly make you question yourself. And love should not leave you emotionally starving. And love should not require you to betray your dignity just to keep somebody interested. And if somebody only notices your value after you begin walking away, be careful. Some people are not in love with you. They are in love with access to you. They miss the convenience. They miss the attention. They miss the emotional support you provided while they gave little in return. But temporary attention is not commitment, and you deserve consistency, and you deserve honesty, and you deserve somebody who does not make you compete for basic respect. And there is power in becoming selective with your energy. Not everybody deserves access to your heart. Not everybody deserves your vulnerability. Some people enter your life only to consume your peace while contributing confusion. Discernment is necessary, and then let us talk about confidence for a moment, because true confidence is often misunderstood. Confidence is not arrogance. Confidence is not pretending to be perfect. Confidence is not acting emotionally unavailable so somebody will chase you. Real confidence is quiet, it is steady, it is grounded. It says, I know my value even when circumstances challenge me. And confident people do not need to manipulate affection because they understand that forced connection never lasts. They understand that if somebody genuinely desires connection, effort will not feel one-sided. They understand that healthy attraction grows where mutual respect exists. And one of the most attractive qualities a person can possess is emotional peace. A calm spirit in a chaotic world becomes unforgettable. Someone who can communicate honestly without playing games becomes refreshing. Someone who knows how to apologize, grow, and remain accountable becomes rare. And people spend so much time learning how to attract others, but very little time learning how to sustain healthy connection once it arrives. Attraction might bring somebody into your life, but emotional maturity keeps relationships alive. Communication matters. Trust matters. Patience matters. Consistency matters. And you cannot build something meaningful while constantly pretending to be somebody else. And eventually the mask becomes exhausting. And eventually performance becomes unsustainable. And eventually the real you begins demanding freedom. And that is why authenticity matters. The right connection should not require you to abandon your personality, your dreams, your boundaries, or your peace. If you must constantly perform to maintain somebody's attention, that connection is already unstable. And there are people who are addicted to being desired, but terrified of genuine intimacy. They enjoy the chase, but resist commitment. They enjoy attention, but avoid accountability. And if you are not emotionally grounded, you will confuse their inconsistency for mystery. But inconsistency is not mystery. Inconsistency is instability. And stop chasing emotionally unavailable people, hoping your love will transform them. And stop ignoring red flags because you are afraid of being alone. And stop lowering your standards just because somebody is attractive. And a beautiful face cannot compensate for a damaging spirit. And you need somebody whose character matches their charm. And then let me say this clearly. The energy you carry determines the connections you attract. If you constantly operate from insecurity, you may attract people who exploit insecurity. If you constantly tolerate disrespect, you may attract people who benefit from weak boundaries. But when you begin operating from self-respect, clarity, and emotional health, unhealthy connections begin falling away naturally. And some people are frustrated because they keep attracting the wrong relationships, but the deeper question is whether they have healed enough to recognize healthy love when it appears. Chaos can become familiar. Dysfunction can become comfortable. Pain can become addictive. And when that happens, peaceful relationships may initially feel boring simply because your nervous system has become accustomed to emotional turbulence. And healing changes your taste. And healing changes your standards. And healing changes what you tolerate. And then there is something powerful about a person who no longer settles from loneliness. Loneliness has caused many people to accept relationships that damage their confidence, drained their joy, and disconnected them from themselves. But solitude is not your enemy. Sometimes solitude is preparation. Sometimes solitude is protection. Sometimes solitude is where your identity is rebuilt. And do not fear being alone so much that you remain attached to people who diminish your spirit. And there is a level of confidence that comes from knowing you can stand on your own emotionally. That confidence changes the way you love. You stop clinging. You stop overcompensating. You stop tolerating emotional crumbs. You begin approaching relationships from desire instead of desperation. And in desperation is dangerous, because desperation makes people abandon wisdom. Desperation ignores warning signs. Desperation overextends itself. Desperation sacrifices dignity trying to secure temporary affection. But healthy connection cannot grow where self-respect is constantly being sacrificed. And you do not need to manipulate somebody into wanting you. And you do not need emotional games. And you do not need to create jealousy. And you do not need to pretend to be unavailable. And you need authenticity. You need confidence. You need emotional maturity. You need a life filled with purpose and peace. And because when somebody encounters a person who genuinely loves themselves in a healthy way, who carries vision, who radiates confidence without arrogance, who protects their peace, who communicates honestly, who knows when to walk away from disrespect, that presence becomes unforgettable. And people are naturally drawn toward light, and not artificial light, and real light, and the kind that comes from healing, and the kind that comes from self-awareness, and the kind that comes from surviving pain without becoming bitter, and the kind that comes from understanding your worth after seasons of rejection. And understand this, rejection is not always loss. Sometimes rejection is redirection. Sometimes the very people who overlooked you were never equipped to appreciate you. Sometimes the closed door protected you from emotional destruction you could not yet see. And you cannot measure your worth by who failed to recognize it. And a diamond does not lose value because somebody lacks the wisdom to identify it. And then some of you are trying to convince people to stay who are already emotionally halfway gone. Stop exhausting yourself trying to resurrect dead connections. Stop pouring energy into people who contribute confusion but never clarity. Stop trying to force intimacy where consistency does not exist. And the right connection will not require you to abandon your peace to maintain it. And the right connection will not thrive on manipulation. And the right connection will not leave you emotionally depleted every single day. And healthy attraction begins when you become deeply connected to yourself. When you know who you are, you stop begging people to define you. When you know your value, you stop accepting less than you deserve. When you know your purpose, you stop making romance your entire identity. And there is greatness inside people who have forgotten themselves while chasing love. There are dreams waiting to be pursued. There is healing waiting to happen. There is confidence waiting to rise. There is purpose waiting to awaken. And when you become aligned internally, externally, everything changes. Your conversations change. Your standards change. Your posture changes. Your decisions change. You stop entering relationships trying to earn love and begin entering them ready to share love from a healthy place. And that energy cannot be ignored. And that peace cannot be faked. And that confidence cannot be manipulated. And people feel it before you even speak. And because the most attractive thing anybody can become is whole. And wholeness does not mean perfection. It means you are no longer depending on another person to complete what you refuse to confront within yourself. It means you have stopped asking relationships to heal wounds that only personal growth can address. Too many people enter relationships carrying emotional emptiness and then become angry when another human being cannot fill a void that was never theirs to fill. And you cannot expect somebody else to become your peace while you remain at war with yourself. And you cannot expect loyalty from others while constantly betraying your own boundaries. And you cannot expect healthy love while entertaining unhealthy habits. And there is a transformation that happens when a person finally becomes tired of living beneath their potential. You start looking at your life differently. You stop tolerating emotional confusion. You stop romanticizing toxic behavior. You stop making excuses for people who repeatedly disrespect your heart. And some people hear inconsistency and call it excitement. And some people hear dishonesty and call it complexity. And some people hear emotional manipulation and call it passion. But wisdom changes your perspective. Wisdom teaches you that healthy connection should not constantly feel like emotional survival. Wisdom teaches you that love without peace eventually becomes exhausting. Wisdom teaches you that somebody can desire your attention while still lacking the maturity to value your heart. And that is why discernment matters. And not everybody who is attracted to you is assigned to your life. And not everybody who compliments you deserves access to you. And not everybody who pursues you is prepared to protect you emotionally. And you must learn how to separate attention from intention. And there are people who love the idea of you, but are unwilling to carry the responsibility that comes with genuine connection. They enjoy your presence during convenient moments, but disappear when emotional accountability becomes necessary. They want affection without commitment. They want closeness without consistency. They want your energy while offering very little in return. And if you are emotionally hungry, you may settle for temporary validation because you are afraid of emptiness. But temporary validation cannot sustain a healthy life. And attention fades, and excitement fluctuates, and physical attraction changes. And what remains is character, and what remains is integrity, and what remains is emotional maturity. And that is why you must stop focusing only on who wants you and start paying attention to who values you. There is a difference. Many people can desire your appearance while being completely careless with your emotions. Many people can pursue you while lacking the discipline to remain loyal. Many people can speak beautifully while living dishonestly, and words alone are cheap, and consistency reveals truth, and actions reveal priorities, and character reveals intention. And one of the greatest forms of self-respect is refusing to ignore behavior that repeatedly hurts you. Some people keep returning to situations that drain them because they are addicted to potential. They keep saying, maybe this person will change. Maybe this situation will improve. Maybe this inconsistency will eventually become stability. But hope without evidence becomes self-destruction. And you cannot build your future on somebody's potential while ignoring their present behavior. And you cannot keep excusing emotional neglect because you are afraid to let go. And you cannot heal in environments that continuously wound you. And there are people who are physically present in relationships but emotionally absent. They say the right things occasionally, but their actions create confusion. And confusion is dangerous because it keeps you emotionally trapped between hope and disappointment. One moment you feel wanted, the next moment you feel invisible. And healthy love does not constantly create emotional whiplash. And healthy love communicates. And healthy love reassures. And healthy love remains intentional even when life becomes difficult. And an intentionality is attractive. There is something powerful about somebody who knows what they want and moves with honesty. Somebody who does not waste your time with emotional games. Somebody who is clear instead of manipulative. Somebody who values communication instead of confusion. And you must stop believing that unpredictability is romantic. Unpredictability may create adrenaline, but adrenaline is not emotional security. Emotional security comes from consistency. It comes from trust. It comes from knowing somebody's words and actions align. And there are too many people losing themselves trying to maintain connections that were never healthy to begin with. They overgive, they overexplain, they overcompensate. They keep pouring into people who contribute little in return. And eventually exhaustion replaces joy. And eventually anxiety replaces peace. And eventually resentment replaces affection. And because relationships cannot survive long-term imbalance. And you were never meant to carry the entire emotional weight of a connection alone. And then listen carefully. The way you see yourself influences the relationships you tolerate. People with low self-worth often accept treatment that emotionally healthy people would immediately reject. Why? Because insecurity makes unhealthy behavior seem acceptable. When somebody secretly believes they are unworthy of genuine love, they begin settling for inconsistent affection because they fear losing even the little attention they receive. But healing changes your standards. And healing teaches you that love should not constantly require self-abandonment. And healing teaches you that loneliness is not a reason to tolerate disrespect. And healing teaches you that walking away from dysfunction is an act of courage, not failure. And there are moments in life when protecting your peace becomes more important than preserving a connection. And then peace is priceless. And do not underestimate the power of emotional peace. A peaceful mind thinks clearly. A peaceful spirit chooses wisely. A peaceful heart recognizes red flags faster because it is no longer addicted to chaos. And some people are uncomfortable with peace because chaos is all they have known. They grew up surrounded by instability. They experienced relationships filled with inconsistency. They became familiar with emotional turbulence. So when something healthy finally appears, it feels unfamiliar. But unfamiliar does not mean wrong. And sometimes healthy love feels quieter because it is not built on manipulation. And sometimes healthy love feels calmer because it is not fueled by insecurity. And sometimes healthy love feels stable because it is rooted in maturity instead of emotional games. And maturity matters. And a mature person understands that attraction alone is not enough to sustain connection. You can be deeply attracted to somebody and still lack compatibility. You can enjoy somebody's company and still recognize they are emotionally unhealthy. You can care about somebody and still understand they are not aligned with your future. And that level of wisdom protects your life. And because emotions without discernment create destruction. And there are people who fell in love with chemistry while ignoring character. And they fell in love with attention while ignoring inconsistency. And they fell in love with charm while ignoring dishonesty. And eventually the truth revealed itself. And character always reveals itself. And time exposes what emotions attempt to hide. And that is why patience is powerful. Patience allows truth to surface naturally. Rushing often blinds people. When you are desperate for connection, you may ignore signs that would normally concern you. You may excuse behavior that should disqualify somebody from deeper access to your life. But emotionally healthy people understand the importance of observation. They pay attention to patterns. They notice how somebody handles conflict. They notice whether somebody takes accountability. They notice whether somebody's behavior remains consistent over time. And consistency is attractive because consistency creates safety. And emotional safety matters more than temporary excitement. And there are people who can make your heart race but cannot make your life peaceful. And there are people who can make you feel desired but cannot make you feel secure. And there are people who can make promises but lack the discipline to honor them. And do not confuse attraction with alignment. And alignment involves shared values, mutual respect, emotional maturity, honesty, and vision. And vision matters because direction determines destination. Two people moving in opposite directions cannot build a healthy future together, no matter how strong the attraction may feel. Love without alignment eventually creates frustration. And you need somebody who understands commitment, and somebody who respects growth, and somebody who values communication, and somebody who understands partnership instead of selfishness. And then while you are waiting for healthy connection, become healthy yourself. And do not spend all your energy trying to become desirable while neglecting personal growth. Build your confidence, heal your wounds, develop your purpose, strengthen your discipline, expand your mind, protect your peace. The strongest attraction often comes from somebody who is deeply committed to becoming the best version of themselves. And there is something magnetic about purpose-driven people. They are not sitting around begging for validation because their life has meaning beyond romance. They are building, growing, learning, evolving, and that kind of energy becomes attractive because it reflects stability and direction. And some people lose themselves in relationships because they never built an identity outside of being wanted. Their confidence depends entirely on somebody else's attention. Their happiness depends entirely on somebody else's mood. Their sense of worth depends entirely on whether somebody chooses them, but that is emotional bondage. And you cannot place your identity into another person's hands. And people are imperfect, and people change, and people make mistakes. And if your entire self-worth depends on external validation, every disappointment will emotionally destroy you. And that is why self-respect matters so deeply. Self-respect stabilizes you during rejection. Self-respect protects you from desperation. Self-respect reminds you that your value does not disappear because somebody failed to recognize it. And there are moments when rejection feels personal, but not every rejection is a reflection of your worth. Sometimes people reject what they are not ready for. Sometimes people walk away because they lack emotional capacity. Sometimes people choose dysfunction because health requires accountability they are unwilling to embrace. And do not internalize every closed door. And some doors close because your future requires different environments. And some doors close because your peace matters more than temporary attachment. And some doors close because staying connected would eventually destroy your confidence. And understand this. You cannot force timing, and you cannot force readiness, and you cannot force emotional maturity, and you cannot force somebody to become the version of themselves you keep imagining. And at some point, you must stop falling in love with fantasy and start paying attention to reality. And reality reveals whether somebody communicates. And reality reveals whether somebody is dependable. And reality reveals whether somebody respects your boundaries. And reality reveals whether somebody is emotionally available. And an emotional availability is one of the rarest qualities today. Many people want companionship but fear vulnerability. They desire intimacy but avoid transparency. They crave connection but resist accountability. They want to receive love without doing the internal work required to sustain it. But real connection requires courage, and it requires honesty, and it requires emotional presence, and it requires the willingness to communicate even during uncomfortable moments. And communication is one of the clearest signs of maturity. People who genuinely value connection do not consistently leave you confused. They clarify. They communicate. They make effort. Silence can sometimes reveal disinterest more clearly than words ever could. And stop chasing people who repeatedly show you emotional inconsistency. And stop convincing yourself that minimal effort is enough. And stop lowering your expectations just to avoid disappointment. And you are allowed to desire consistency. And you are allowed to desire honesty. And you are allowed to desire emotional security. And that does not make you needy. And that makes you emotionally healthy. And there is a dangerous trend where people glorify emotional detachment as strength. They act cold. They avoid vulnerability. They pretend not to care because they believe indifference makes them powerful. But emotional unavailability is not strength. Strength is the ability to remain open without losing self-respect. Strength is the ability to communicate honestly without manipulation. Strength is the ability to love without abandoning wisdom. And wisdom teaches balance. And do not become so guarded that nobody can reach your heart. But do not become so emotionally reckless that everybody gains access to it. And balance protects you, and discernment protects you, and self-awareness protects you. And there are people who walk into every relationship expecting pain because pain has become familiar. They sabotage healthy opportunities because fear whispers, this will eventually hurt too. But healing requires courage. Healing requires believing that healthy connection is possible even after disappointment. And do not allow past heartbreak to poison your future. And not everybody will betray you. And not everybody will manipulate you. And not everybody will abandon you. But you must become wise enough to recognize who deserves access to your vulnerability. And vulnerability should never be rushed. And trust should be built gradually. And character should be observed consistently. And connection should deepen through mutual effort. And there is beauty in relationships that grow naturally without force. No manipulation, no emotional games, no constant uncertainty. Just two people choosing each other intentionally. Choosing communication, choosing honesty, choosing growth, and that kind of connection still exists. But you must stop searching from a place of desperation. And desperation clouds judgment, and desperation tolerates dysfunction, and desperation ignores incompatibility. And healthy attraction begins internally. And when you are emotionally grounded, you stop chasing validation because you already know your worth. You stop trying to convince people to love you because you understand love cannot be forced. You stop shrinking yourself for acceptance because you finally recognize that authenticity is more valuable than temporary approval. And an authenticity attracts the right people. And the wrong people may reject it. And the wrong people may misunderstand it. And the wrong people may walk away from it. But the right people will recognize it. And the right people will appreciate it. And the right people will feel safe around it. And never underestimate the power of being genuinely yourself in a world full of performance. Authentic people stand out because they are rare. They are not constantly pretending. They are not exhausting themselves trying to impress everybody. They are grounded in identity, and identity creates confidence. And confidence changes your energy. And confidence changes your decisions. And confidence changes what you tolerate. And when you know your worth, you stop negotiating with disrespect. And when you know your worth, you stop begging for bare minimum effort. And when you know your worth, you stop remaining loyal to situations that continuously break your spirit. And you begin understanding that protecting your peace is not selfish, and it is necessary. And there is incredible freedom in no longer needing everybody to choose you. Freedom comes when you realize rejection does not diminish your value. Freedom comes when you stop measuring your worth by somebody else's inability to appreciate you. Freedom comes when your confidence becomes internal instead of dependent on constant external validation. And that is when your presence changes. And that is when your conversations change. And that is when your relationships change. And because people can feel when somebody has finally healed enough to stop settling for less than they deserve. And there is a certain glow that comes from emotional freedom. You can see it in the way a person carries themselves. You can hear it in the way they speak. They no longer sound desperate for approval. They no longer move from fear of abandonment. They no longer compromise their dignity just to avoid loneliness. Something inside them has awakened, and once that awakening happens, they cannot return to the version of themselves that accepted emotional crumbs. And too many people are starving spiritually while trying to appear fulfilled emotionally. They smile publicly but privately feel exhausted from constantly trying to maintain one-sided relationships. They give everything they have, hoping somebody will finally recognize their value. But love should not require you to destroy yourself in order to sustain it. And you should not have to disappear for somebody else to feel comfortable. And you should not have to silence your needs just to avoid conflict. And you should not have to constantly overextend yourself while receiving little in return. And real connection involves reciprocity, and it involves mutual effort, and it involves emotional responsibility. And there is danger in becoming addicted to fixing people. Some individuals spend their lives trying to rescue emotionally unavailable partners because they believe love means sacrifice without limits. They think enduring emotional pain proves loyalty. They think suffering for somebody is evidence of devotion. But there is a difference between commitment and self-destruction. And you are not required to bleed endlessly just to prove you care. And some people do not want healing. And some people do not want growth. And some people enjoy remaining emotionally immature because accountability requires change. And no matter how deeply you care, you cannot transform somebody who is committed to dysfunction. And that realization is painful, but it is necessary. And because many people lose years of their lives trying to earn consistency from individuals who have no intention of becoming consistent. They keep waiting for potential to become reality. They keep hoping words will eventually turn into action. They keep imagining a future that the other person has never truly demonstrated the discipline to create. And hope without wisdom becomes emotional imprisonment. And at some point, you must stop listening only to promises and start paying attention to patterns. And patterns reveal priorities, and patterns reveal character, and patterns reveal truth. And a person can speak beautifully for a moment, but consistency requires discipline, and consistency reveals integrity, and an integrity matters more than charm. And there are charming people who leave destruction everywhere they go because charisma without character becomes manipulation. They know how to say what others want to hear. They know how to create emotional excitement. They know how to make temporary moments feel intoxicating. But beneath the surface, there is instability. And an instability eventually exposes itself. And that is why emotional maturity is more attractive than temporary excitement. Emotional maturity knows how to communicate during conflict instead of disappearing. Emotional maturity knows how to apologize sincerely instead of shifting blame. Emotional maturity understands that healthy relationships require honesty, even when honesty feels uncomfortable. And an honesty is powerful. And honesty removes confusion. And honesty creates clarity. And honesty reveals intentions. And too many people remain trapped in emotional confusion because they are afraid of difficult conversations. They settle for uncertainty because certainty might force them to confront painful truths. But clarity is a gift even when it hurts, and a painful truth can heal you, and a comforting lie can destroy you. And never fear clarity, and fear prolonged deception, and fear wasting years pretending something unhealthy is sustainable, and fear abandoning your identity just to maintain temporary attachment. And there are individuals who lose themselves completely inside relationships because they build their entire emotional world around another person. Their mood depends on somebody else's attention. Their confidence depends on somebody else's validation. Their peace depends on somebody else's consistency. And when that relationship becomes unstable, their entire sense of self collapses. But emotionally healthy people understand balance. And love should add to your life, not replace your identity. And connection should strengthen you, not consume you. And partnership should inspire growth, not create emotional dependency. And there is a difference between love and attachment. And attachment often comes from fear, and love comes from choice. And attachment says, I cannot survive without you. And love says, I appreciate you deeply, but I still know who I am. And attachment clings desperately, and love respects boundaries. And attachment fears abandonment constantly. And love operates from trust and emotional stability. And that is why self-awareness matters. If you do not understand your emotional patterns, you may unconsciously repeat cycles that continuously hurt you. Some people keep attracting emotionally unavailable individuals because deep down they are terrified of genuine intimacy themselves. Others chase inconsistent relationships because unpredictability feels familiar, and healing requires honesty with yourself. And you must ask difficult questions. And why do you tolerate disrespect? And why do you chase unavailable people? And why do you ignore red flags? And why do you settle for inconsistency? And self-reflection changes everything. And because once you understand your patterns, you gain power to break them. And breaking unhealthy cycles requires courage. Familiar pain can feel safer than unfamiliar peace. Some people would rather remain inside dysfunction they understand than risk stepping into healthier environments that challenge their old beliefs. But growth requires discomfort, and healing requires change, and transformation requires honesty. And you cannot become emotionally healthy while remaining committed to unhealthy habits. And sometimes the hardest habit to break is seeking validation from people who are incapable of giving healthy love. And there are people exhausting themselves trying to be enough for individuals who are emotionally empty inside. No matter how much affection they give, it is never enough, because the problem was never a lack of love. The problem was emotional incapacity. And you cannot pour enough love into somebody to heal wounds they refuse to confront. And you cannot love somebody into maturity. And you cannot sacrifice enough to make somebody value you. And value begins internally. And people who value themselves differently treat others differently. And people who respect themselves understand respect. And people who heal emotionally stop spreading emotional damage everywhere they go. And that is why your healing matters not only for you, but also for every future relationship you enter. Unhealed pain has a way of bleeding onto innocent people. Insecurity creates jealousy. Fear creates control. Trauma creates emotional walls. And if those wounds remain untreated, they begin shaping every connection. But healing changes how you love. And healing allows you to communicate instead of manipulate. And healing allows you to trust without becoming controlling. And healing allows you to remain vulnerable without losing self-respect. And vulnerability is not weakness. And many people avoid vulnerability because they fear rejection. They fear being seen fully. They fear emotional exposure. But genuine intimacy cannot exist without vulnerability. Real connection requires honesty about fears, needs, emotions, and imperfections. And the strongest people are not those who never feel emotion. And the strongest people are those who can feel deeply without allowing emotions to control their wisdom. And that balance is powerful. And emotionally balanced people attract differently. They do not chase frantically. They do not panic over temporary distance. They do not lose themselves inside infatuation. They remain grounded. And grounded people are difficult to manipulate because they are not emotionally starving. And they know who they are. And they know what they deserve. And they know when to walk away. And in walking away is sometimes an act of self-respect. And not every relationship is meant to continue forever. And not every connection is healthy. And not every person deserves unlimited access to your energy. And there are moments when leaving becomes necessary for your emotional survival. And then leaving does not always mean you stopped caring. And sometimes leaving means you finally started caring about yourself too. And that kind of strength changes your life. And because people who respect themselves differently choose differently. They stop entertaining situations that continuously disturb their peace. They stop confusing intensity with compatibility. They stop romanticizing suffering. And suffering has been romanticized far too often. And people celebrate toxic dynamics because they mistake emotional extremes for passion. Constant fighting, constant jealousy, constant instability, constant emotional highs and lows. But emotional chaos is not evidence of deeper love. And sometimes chaos simply reveals unresolved wounds. And healthy love does not constantly destroy your nervous system. And healthy love creates stability. And healthy love creates emotional safety. And healthy love allows honesty without fear. And an emotional safety is one of the most beautiful gifts two people can offer each other. To feel heard, to feel respected, to feel valued, to feel secure enough to communicate openly without fear of humiliation or manipulation. And that kind of connection requires maturity from both people. And one emotionally healthy person cannot sustain an entire relationship alone. And both individuals must be willing to grow. And both individuals must value honesty. And both individuals must choose consistency. And relationships fail not only because of lack of attraction, but often because of lack of emotional discipline. And discipline matters. And love is not only a feeling, and feelings fluctuate. And discipline determines whether somebody remains intentional when emotions become complicated. And discipline chooses communication over avoidance. And discipline chooses loyalty over temptation. And discipline chooses honesty over convenience. And people who lack discipline often leave destruction behind them because they live entirely by temporary emotions. They chase excitement without considering consequences. They pursue attention without valuing commitment. They confuse freedom with irresponsibility, but emotionally mature people understand that real freedom includes accountability. And accountability is attractive. And a person who can acknowledge mistakes honestly becomes trustworthy. And a person who can apologize sincerely without defensiveness becomes refreshing. And a person who can reflect, grow, and evolve becomes rare. And too many people want deep connection without deep self-awareness. But without self-awareness, relationships become cycles of repeated pain. And you keep repeating arguments. And you keep repeating insecurities. And you keep repeating unhealthy patterns. And because what remains unaddressed eventually repeats itself. And that is why healing requires intentionality. And you must confront the beliefs that sabotage your peace. And you must challenge the fears that control your decisions. And you must release the lies that convinced you to settle for less. And some people secretly believe they are difficult to love. And some people secretly believe abandonment is inevitable. And some people secretly believe they must overperform just to keep somebody interested. But those beliefs often come from wounds, not truth. And wounds distort perception. And a wounded mind interprets inconsistency as normal. And a wounded heart accepts crumbs because it fears emptiness. And a wounded spirit clings to unhealthy people because loneliness feels terrifying. But healing restores clarity. And healing teaches you that your worth is not dependent on constant validation. And healing teaches you that peace matters. And healing teaches you that walking away from dysfunction can become the beginning of transformation. And there is incredible power in choosing yourself after years of abandonment. and not selfishness and self-respect. And there is a difference. And selfishness ignores others completely, and self-respect refuses to ignore yourself completely. And many people have spent years abandoning themselves emotionally just to preserve relationships that were already damaging them. They ignored their intuition. They ignored their needs. They ignored their exhaustion. They kept sacrificing peace, hoping things would eventually improve. But eventually your spirit grows tired. And eventually your heart becomes exhausted. And eventually your soul demands honesty. And an honesty changes everything. And because once you become honest about what is hurting you, you can no longer comfortably remain inside dysfunction. And you begin recognizing that peace is more valuable than performance. And you begin recognizing that loneliness is temporary, but self-betrayal leaves deeper scars. And you begin recognizing that not every connection deserves unlimited chances. And boundaries become necessary. And boundaries are healthy. And boundaries are not punishment. And boundaries are protection. And they protect your emotional well-being. And they protect your peace. And they protect your identity. And people who become angry when you establish boundaries often benefited from your lack of them. But healthy individuals respect limits. And healthy individuals value communication. And healthy individuals understand reciprocity. And reciprocity matters deeply. Relationships become unhealthy when only one person consistently sacrifices. One person cannot carry emotional intimacy alone. One person cannot endlessly pour while the other continuously consumes. And healthy connection involves mutual care and mutual effort and mutual respect. And respect is foundational. Without respect, attraction eventually becomes meaningless. You can admire somebody physically and still be emotionally unsafe with them. You can enjoy chemistry while lacking emotional trust. But trust matters more than temporary excitement. And trust creates stability. And trust creates safety. And trust allows intimacy to deepen. And trust is built slowly through consistent behavior. And not promises. And not charm. And not temporary effort. And consistency builds trust. And character sustains trust. And integrity protects trust. And that is why emotionally mature people pay attention to actions more than words. They understand that anybody can create emotional excitement temporarily, but sustained honesty requires character. And character reveals itself most clearly during difficult moments. And anybody can appear loving when circumstances are easy. And anybody can appear loyal when temptation is absent. And anybody can appear patient when emotions remain comfortable. But pressure reveals maturity. And conflict reveals communication skills. And disappointment reveals emotional discipline. And emotionally disciplined people handle challenges differently. They do not immediately run from discomfort. They do not disappear during difficult conversations. They do not manipulate emotions to maintain control. They communicate with honesty and respect, and that kind of maturity becomes deeply attractive because it creates emotional peace, and peace is rare in a world full of confusion. And so many people are emotionally exhausted because they keep entertaining relationships that drain them spiritually. They keep hoping unstable people will eventually provide stability. They keep expecting emotionally unavailable individuals to suddenly become emotionally present. But wisdom recognizes reality, and wisdom stops chasing potential while ignoring patterns, and wisdom chooses peace over emotional chaos. And wisdom understands that attraction without alignment eventually creates pain. And alignment begins within yourself first. And before you seek healthy love, externally cultivate health internally and become emotionally grounded. And become self-aware. And become disciplined. And become intentional. And because the energy you carry influences the relationships you attract. And when you finally stop operating from desperation, insecurity, and fear, your entire life begins to shift. And you stop chasing people who only contact you when they are lonely. And you stop entertaining conversations that leave you emotionally drained. And you stop explaining your worth to individuals committed to misunderstanding you. And that shift is powerful because it changes the standard you carry into every relationship. Standards are not about arrogance. Standards are about self-respect. They are the boundaries that protect your emotional health from people who only know how to take without giving. And then there are many people in this world who are emotionally empty, yet emotionally demanding. They expect loyalty while refusing accountability. They expect patience while offering inconsistency. They expect understanding while repeatedly creating confusion. They want the rewards of connection without the responsibility of commitment. But emotionally healthy people recognize imbalance quickly. And they understand that one-sided love eventually becomes emotional exhaustion. And they understand that constantly rescuing people drains the soul. And they understand that peace is too valuable to sacrifice for temporary attention. And attention is not the same as intention. And some people know how to keep you emotionally attached without ever truly choosing you. They give just enough affection to keep hope alive, but never enough consistency to create security. They leave breadcrumbs instead of commitment. And if you are not careful, you will spend years trying to earn a level of love they were never prepared to give. And that is why discernment matters more than desire. And desire can blind you. And desire can make red flags look harmless. And desire can make inconsistency feel exciting. But discernment sees clearly, and discernment recognizes patterns. And discernment values peace over emotional addiction. And there are relationships that survive entirely on emotional highs and lows. One day, everything feels perfect. The next day, everything feels uncertain. One moment there is affection, the next moment there is distance. And that cycle creates emotional dependency because unpredictability can become addictive. But addiction is not intimacy, and confusion is not connection, and emotional instability is not romance. And healthy love should not constantly leave you questioning where you stand. And healthy love communicates, and healthy love reassures, and healthy love values emotional clarity, and clarity is kindness. And people who genuinely value you do not intentionally create unnecessary confusion. They understand that emotional uncertainty damages trust. They understand that silence can wound. They understand that consistency matters. And there is strength in somebody who chooses honesty instead of emotional manipulation. Strength is not playing games to maintain control. Strength is not pretending not to care in order to appear desirable. Strength is emotional maturity. Strength is clear communication. Strength is the courage to be intentional. And intentional people stand out in a world filled with distraction. And many individuals are emotionally distracted. They crave attention from everybody but intimacy with nobody. They want admiration more than connection. They chase validation because they have not yet learned how to validate themselves internally. And that is why some people collect attention constantly, but still feel deeply lonely. External attention cannot heal internal emptiness. And you can receive compliments every day and still feel unworthy. And you can attract many people and still feel emotionally disconnected. And you can be desired physically while remaining unseen emotionally. And because true fulfillment is deeper than temporary admiration. And true fulfillment comes from alignment. And alignment with your values. And alignment with your purpose. And alignment with your peace. And when you become aligned internally, your standards become clearer externally. You stop tolerating relationships that pull you away from your growth. You stop entertaining people who consistently disturb your peace. You stop shrinking your needs just to avoid losing somebody. And fear causes many people to abandon themselves. And fear says accept less or you might end up alone. And fear says stay silent or they might leave. And fear says ignore the red flags because nobody else will want you. But fear lies. And fear convinces people to remain inside emotional prisons. And fear convinces people to tolerate behavior that slowly destroys their confidence. And fear convinces people that loneliness is worse than self-betrayal. But there is nothing lonelier than constantly abandoning yourself to keep somebody else comfortable. And there is nothing more exhausting than pretending you are okay while your spirit is slowly breaking. And eventually your soul begins demanding honesty. And you start realizing that peace matters more than performance. And you start realizing that healthy love should not require constant emotional survival. And you start realizing that your needs are not burdens. And that realization changes everything. And because emotionally mature people understand that needing respect, communication, honesty, and consistency does not make you needy. Those are healthy expectations. The problem is that many people have normalized dysfunction for so long that healthy standards now appear unrealistic. But standards are necessary. And without standards, you tolerate anything. And without standards, you ignore warning signs. And without standards, you keep repeating painful cycles. And cycles repeat until awareness interrupts them. And awareness is powerful because it exposes unhealthy patterns clearly. Once you become aware of emotional manipulation, you stop romanticizing it. Once you become aware of inconsistency, you stop excusing it. Once you become aware of your own worth, you stop settling for emotional crumbs. And there is a difference between compromise and self-abandonment. And compromise involves mutual effort. And self-abandonment involves sacrificing your emotional well-being repeatedly just to maintain connection. And many people have become experts at abandoning themselves. They silence their feelings. They ignore their intuition. They minimize their pain. They overextend their energy trying to become lovable enough for people who are emotionally unavailable. But love should not require you to erase yourself. And the right connection will not demand that you betray your identity. And the right connection will not punish you for communicating your needs. And the right connection will not thrive on confusion. And if somebody consistently makes you feel emotionally unsafe, emotionally anxious, or emotionally unseen, pay attention. Your nervous system often recognizes danger before your mind accepts it. And that constant anxiety is not always evidence of deep love. And sometimes it is evidence of instability. And sometimes your spirit is reacting to inconsistency. And sometimes your intuition is warning you that peace is missing. And peace matters more than intensity. And people often mistake emotional intensity for compatibility because intensity creates excitement. But excitement alone cannot sustain healthy relationships. Eventually, real life arrives. Challenges arrive. Communication becomes necessary. Emotional maturity becomes necessary. And that is where many relationships collapse because attraction alone was never enough. And chemistry can create connection. But character sustains connection. And anybody can create sparks temporarily. And not everybody can create emotional safety consistently. And that is why you must learn to value depth over performance. Some individuals know how to appear impressive initially, but lack emotional substance beneath the surface. They are skilled at seduction but weak in consistency. They know how to create excitement but not stability, and stability matters. And there is beauty in reliability, and there is beauty in honesty, and there is beauty in emotional consistency. And a peaceful relationship may not always feel dramatic, but drama is not proof of deeper love. And sometimes drama is simply unresolved trauma colliding. And sometimes people become addicted to emotional turbulence because calmness feels unfamiliar. But healthy love should not constantly destroy your peace. And healthy love should support your growth. And healthy love should strengthen your confidence. And healthy love should create room for honesty. And honesty requires courage. And many people avoid honesty because honesty forces accountability. It is easier to play games than communicate directly. It is easier to disappear than explain feelings honestly. It is easier to create confusion than face difficult conversations. But emotional avoidance damages trust. And avoidance leaves people emotionally stranded. And avoidance creates wounds that honesty could have prevented. And that is why emotionally mature people choose communication even when uncomfortable. And they understand that silence can create unnecessary pain. And they understand that clarity is respectful. And they understand that maturity means facing difficult moments instead of escaping them. And people who consistently avoid accountability often repeat the same destructive patterns everywhere they go. Different faces, same dysfunction, different relationships, same emotional chaos. Because without self-awareness, patterns remain unchanged. And transformation begins when people become willing to confront themselves honestly, and not just others and themselves. And it is easy to identify the flaws in everybody else. And it is harder to examine your own wounds, your own insecurities, your own unhealthy patterns. But growth requires self-reflection, and growth requires humility, and growth requires accountability. And accountability is attractive because it reveals emotional strength. People who can admit mistakes, apologize sincerely, and evolve emotionally create healthier relationships than those who constantly defend unhealthy behavior. And pride destroys many connections because pride refuses correction. Pride refuses growth. Pride values ego over intimacy. But emotionally mature people value understanding more than winning. And they value peace more than control. And they value growth more than performance. And growth changes your relationships profoundly. And as you heal emotionally, certain connections begin falling away naturally. Conversations that once entertained you begin feeling draining. People who once felt exciting begin feeling exhausting. Dysfunction that once felt normal begins feeling unbearable. And that shift is evidence of transformation. And because healing changes what your spirit can tolerate. And healing raises your standards naturally. And healing increases your discernment. And healing teaches you that protecting your peace is not selfish, and it is wisdom. And some people confuse access with entitlement. They believe that because they once had access to your time, energy, or heart, they should always maintain it, regardless of how they treat you. But access should never become unconditional tolerance for disrespect. And healthy relationships require mutual care, and mutual respect, and mutual effort, and an effort matters. And people prioritize what they genuinely value, and consistent effort reveals sincere intention, and inconsistent effort reveals instability. And if somebody repeatedly leaves you confused about their intentions, pay attention to that confusion. Confusion is often clarity disguised. When somebody truly values connection, their actions eventually become evident, and not perfect, but intentional. And perfection is impossible, and intentionality is a choice, and there is beauty in being chosen intentionally, not conditionally, not temporarily, intentionally, to be valued for who you truly are, instead of who somebody hopes to reshape you into. And that kind of love requires authenticity from both people, and pretending eventually becomes exhausting, and masks eventually crack, and performance eventually collapses. And authenticity creates sustainable connection because it allows people to be seen honestly, and being truly seen is one of the deepest human desires, and not admired superficially, and seen deeply, and seen emotionally, and seen truthfully. But many people fear being fully seen because they secretly believe they are unworthy beneath the surface. So they perform constantly. They become who others expect. They suppress their truth. They hide their emotions. They shrink their personality. But suppressing yourself for acceptance creates internal loneliness. And you may gain temporary approval while losing connection with yourself. And nothing external can compensate for internal disconnection. And that is why self-acceptance matters so deeply. When you genuinely accept yourself, your relationships change because you stop seeking people to validate your existence constantly. You stop needing constant reassurance to feel valuable. You stop tolerating disrespect simply because somebody occasionally gives you attention. And self-acceptance creates emotional stability. And emotionally stable people love differently, and they love without losing themselves. And they care without becoming consumed, and they remain open without abandoning wisdom. And that balance is powerful, and because balance protects your peace while still allowing genuine intimacy. And there are people who have hardened themselves after heartbreak and now refuse vulnerability completely. They believe shutting down emotionally will protect them from pain. But walls may block pain temporarily while also blocking connection. And the goal is not emotional numbness, and the goal is emotional wisdom. And wisdom allows you to remain open while discerning carefully who deserves access to your heart. And not everybody deserves that access. And some individuals only know how to consume. And some individuals only know how to take. And some individuals only know how to create emotional confusion. But healthy people contribute peace. And healthy people contribute honesty. And healthy people contribute emotional safety. And an emotional safety becomes deeply attractive once you have experienced enough chaos to understand its value. And there comes a point in healing where peace becomes more attractive than excitement. Stability becomes more attractive than unpredictability. Maturity becomes more attractive than charm. And once your spirit reaches that place, your choices begin changing automatically. And you stop chasing intensity, and you stop romanticizing dysfunction, and you stop entertaining people who repeatedly disturb your peace. And because your soul finally understands that love should not constantly feel like war. There comes a moment in life when your heart gets tired of breaking for people who never truly valued it. A moment when your soul can no longer survive on empty promises, temporary attention, and inconsistent love. And maybe that moment is tonight for somebody listening to me right now. And maybe tonight is the night you finally stop blaming yourself for somebody else's inability to love you correctly. And maybe tonight is the night you stop begging for the bare minimum. And maybe tonight is the night you realize that chasing people has only been pushing you further away from your own peace. And listen to me carefully. You were never created to shrink yourself just to keep somebody interested. You were never meant to lose sleep wondering why you were not enough for people who were too blind to recognize your value. The problem was never that you lacked worth. The problem is that you kept placing your heart into the hands of people who did not know how to handle something genuine. And the saddest thing in this world is watching good people destroy themselves trying to be loved by emotionally unavailable people. Watching somebody with a pure heart question their beauty, question their value, question their identity, because somebody else failed to appreciate them. But no more after tonight. And no more chasing people who only remember you when they feel lonely. And no more sacrificing your dignity just to keep somebody from leaving. And no more crying over people who gave you confusion instead of commitment. And you have to reach a point where your peace becomes more important than being chosen. A point where your self-respect becomes stronger than your fear of loneliness. Because the truth is, the right people will never require you to beg for love, attention, consistency, or respect. And then the moment you finally stop running after people, the moment you start healing, growing, building confidence, protecting your energy, and loving yourself correctly, something powerful begins to happen. And your presence changes. and your standards change, and your energy changes, and you stop looking desperate for love and start becoming magnetic without even trying. And because confidence attracts, peace attracts, self-respect attracts, purpose attracts. And then when somebody sees a person who knows their worth, protects their heart, walks away from disrespect, and no longer settles for emotional crumbs, that kind of energy becomes unforgettable.